Nashville for the streetlight LED conversion project. And a project in Sumner County for ADA transition plan implementation. And then finally, a project for Metro Nashville for pedestrian improvements at various locations. So that concludes all the COVID relief awards, proposing to add all of these projects to the TIP with COVID relief funding. And then we have a request from Mount Juliet for the East Division Street widening project, asking to add the project to the TIP, but this is with all local funds. And then finally, another request from Mount Juliet, requesting to add the project for the Eastern Connector Phase 2 project, requesting to add the project to the TIP, again with all local funds. And I said finally, but we actually have one more, also a request from GNRC for regional transportation data acquisition. This was a discussion that we had, I think, in our meetings together the past couple months, where we're looking to acquire some big data tools that will improve transportation planning and system performance monitoring that would be available to our membership. So we're requesting to add the funds to the TIP for that future purchase. And that concludes our proposed slate of amendments for this cycle.
Thank you, Anna. Of course, these are informational items for us today, but with that, is there any questions for staff? Yes, sir.
Agenda report, under item 4A, describes the first project that described is the Nolensville Pipe 5 meters down to Nolensville. And then the last project that's listed on that agenda report also is the same road, wondering if it's a different page, one depot,
It's the same project, it's the same project, but a different tip like. That's accident.
Are you guys in the list?
The first project on the list, and the last project on the list, same road, but different. One, 2021 tip number.
So I think we also may be operating off different versions of the agenda. I think what I have in front of me is a more updated version of the packet. I think that was a mistake in one of the first versions that was emailed where things just got out of line there. But there's only one proposed amendment for Nolensville pipe widening.
You know what the right tip ID is, it's 2022?
It's 2022-12-129.
That's 4-lane widening of Highway 41A.
2 to 5 lanes.
I was fine until we rolled out the tip number. I don't know if the tip numbers don't match either.
I'm sorry for the confusion for those of you that have the older version of the agenda, but the correct tip number for this project is 2022-12-129.
Would it be appropriate for you guys to just mail us or email us the updated version of this?
Sure, that's not a problem. Yeah,
Also,
you can also pick up,
Okay.
package right,
Yeah.
right out there, it's updated.
Thank you, I'm sorry about that.
thank you, Lou. No worries. Apologies for the confusion. Any other
I have
questions?
one more question. When's the deadline? I looked this up, but cycle week.
It will be mid to end of January. And then TCC will have their first look at those in February, and we'll plan to adopt in March for that next cycle. You do, yes.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Anna, for that.
One more thing.
Oh, yes, go
Before,
ahead.
sorry, just one more thing before we move on from, TIP-related amendments. We did receive a request from Metro Nashville for a new project, an effort that they're undertaking on the East Bank. The full scope of the project is development of a multimodal corridor and road using some existing segments and some new, from the areas around Jefferson Street and Spring Street to the I-65 and Korean Veterans Boulevard area. This is a project that is not currently contained in our RTP, but we're planning to work with Metro to incorporate this project into the RTP with most likely a December adoption. So I just wanted to go ahead and give you guys a heads up that next time we meet, you're probably going to see an RTP amendment containing this project from Metro, as well as an accompanying TIP amendment that we'll hope to adopt concurrently. I know Metro's overall estimated project cost is about $150 million for this project. TDOT has committed $25 million in state LIC, local interstate connector funds for the project, which Metro will match 50-50. Marty, I don't know if you want to say anything about the project, but we know that that's going to be on our agenda next time we meet, so I want to go ahead and put that in front of all of you.
I'll just mention that this project is getting into the tip of the time, it's really important for the bank acquisition. We have a lot of problems with bank guys doing these bank studies. So we're trying to make sure that we get this property so we can have a maximum benefit from the health care and all.
Is this in relation to, give me your report, you watch something over there? I don't need to know the name of it.
Oracle.
Multi-billion-dollar investment in individual entities.
The entire river area, of course, north of Census
Which project, because I've got a lot of.
Okay. That's good. Thank you all. Thank you, Anna. Seeing no other questions, we'll move on to item 4B. That is the overview of the next TIP. That would be fiscal years 2023 to 26 TIP and the development process. I'll turn that back to Anna.
You can drive, or no, it's not or I can use that.
Take it away, Anna.
Thank you, Andy. I don't think it's Thank you. Apologies for the technical difficulty in advancing our slides here. All right, so lots of TIP conversation today. So we're wanting to begin the conversation about our upcoming update to our transportation improvement program. This is something that, of course, you'll remember if you've been through this before with us, is going to involve a fair amount of effort and cooperation from all of us to accomplish. If you'll remember, our current TIP, which is fiscal years 2020 to 2023, was adopted by the Transportation Policy Board in October of 2019. And in addition to all of the project pages, most of us are familiar with looking at, as we just did with some of the TIP amendments. The TIP document also establishes our programming policies for the funds our region receives, as well as our procedures for modifications to the document. So over the coming calendar year, our TIP is scheduled for a major update with adoption of the new fiscal years 2023 to 2026 TIP anticipated in October of 2022. These are the main requirements of a transportation improvement program document. It must be consistent with our adopted regional plan, must be fiscally constrained to reasonable revenue assumptions, must include both capital and non-capital surface transportation projects that are being funded with federal transportation funds, or any regionally significant project requiring action by FHWA or FTA, regardless of what that funding source is. It also must include at least a 4-year horizon and be updated at least every 4 years. So the major steps that we're going to be taking throughout this update are in view here, beginning with a review of our existing program projects. And then following that effort, we're going to be asking membership about any new project funding requests. And after that, we'll work to prioritize projects based on the available funding that we have to allocate. And then once we have our draft slate of projects, we will draft the complete TIP document and submit that for state and federal review. We'll release that draft document for public review and comment. And then finally, our Transportation Policy Board will adopt the new TIP and we will submit it for federal review and approval. So one of our front-end tasks at GNRC will be to prepare our financial projections so that we can gain an understanding of the funding levels that we have to work with as we work to prioritize projects for the TIP. You know, as we all know, there's a federal transportation bill hanging in the balance as we speak. So there's a bit of uncertainty where the financial projections are concerned, but at this time, we're just going to be operating under the same assumptions as in previous years. And just to recap what those assumptions look like, this is a snapshot of our funding tables containing federal transportation funds that are suballocated to the planning area of our MPO. It's about $25 million annually, and as this table shows, includes several federal funding programs, the largest, of course, being our Surface Transportation Block Grant that is received by our planning area, as well as a suballocation of Transportation Alternatives Program funds, various transit funding programs, some HIP, Highway Improvement Program funds, as well as some local STBG funds that are provided to some of our members by TDOT. So the next step will be to determine the current TIP status and funding needs. That's where we're going to take a look at all of the existing projects in the TIP and decide, you know, what they're going to need moving forward funding-wise. Using the wrong keyboard. So just a reminder about our online interactive TIP database. I know that a lot of you are familiar with it, but if you're newer to the process and need any kind of refresher on this tool, we'd be more than happy to walk through that with you during this initial review of each agency's existing TIP projects. But we'll probably be looking to visit with you all kind of as close to on a one-on-one basis, maybe in county groups, depending on, you know, what we decide to do. But we'll be taking a deep dive into all of your existing TIP projects, making sure that, you know, the scope is still the same as what's outlined in the TIP, discuss what funding has been obligated and expended and whether or not the funding that's on your TIP page looks good going forward. So, you know, I mentioned earlier that this effort's going to take a fair amount of cooperation among all of us to get the new document drafted. And these are some of the most important expectations for all of us, both our membership and us as GNRC and MPO staff. You know, as we take a look, especially at those existing projects in the TIP, you know, those of you that have money programmed to projects, you know, need to take a look and make sure you've provided timely and accurate project descriptions, costs, and schedules. Make sure that, you know, we look at all the documentation that you submit really well in order to prevent amendments in the future. You know, making sure you provide your proof of local match, that you've got that available, be timely in obligating your funding. You know, those are all really important things as a local agency to kind of hold up your end of the bargain when you've received some of this funding. And then likewise, you know, staff's responsibility is that we develop a fair and unbiased selection process and enforce our program policies to also make sure that these projects are moving along in a timely manner and that we're getting our obligations and expenditures done. So then finally, our last kind of shorter term action that we'll be looking at doing is to issue a call for new funding opportunities for RTP projects. So we'll be stepping into a next phase of inquiring about new funding requests. And new project funding requests can come from projects that are contained in the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan. Just a quick reminder that we have an application available on our website at the URL that's listed there in orange, and you can take a look at this map and easily see what projects are included on the fiscally constrained project list of our long-range plan. So once all of our new requests have been compiled, we'll work to prioritize those based on the available funding that we're able to come up with after we take a look at all the existing projects, what's going, what's staying, what's rolling out in order to free up funds for new requests for projects in the plan but not in the TIP. And I think that's the last slide on the TIP development. We do have a timeline in the works that outlines the full scope of the new TIP update development. We're kind of fine tuning that, but you can expect to see that from us probably fairly soon. It'll be starting all the way from now this fall to looking into us really taking some action items early in the calendar year next year, and then walk through the schedule all the way until January of 2023, when we will hope to receive official federal approval of the new TIP.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. Any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none at this time, we'll be having some more information as we move forward on this. Again, this is informational for us today, so no action required on this item on the agenda. Yes, sir. Yes.
Do you expect to have another corporate project for, like, technology and
I think realistically, it may be unlikely that we'll do that before this new TIP is adopted, but I wouldn't quote me on that because we really don't have a concrete plan right now for the next call for projects for that.
This is more of a legislative question. Do you guys anticipate more special calls for projects, i.e. like the relief program, with this new infrastructure bill, if and when it passes, or if or when it passes?
I think that's a TBD at this point. I don't know that we can anticipate what those options might be.
Good question.
It is.
Yeah. Any others? Okay. All right. Seeing none, let's move on to our next item on our agenda, item 4C. That would be the highlights from the 2020 census. I believe we have Carson Cooper, GNRC Senior Planner, to present highlights on this item.
Hi, Carson Cooper. Hopefully you can all hear me. We plan to kind of create a series of 2020 census updates just because we want to be on top of how our region is changing and with the decennial count, as well as how strange 2020 was. We just think that demographics are kind of at the forefront right now. This data is just the redistricting data counts that you all have probably been looking at for drafting council districts. So it's just those total counts, and it's not super in-depth information, but we started just going through some trends and wanted to give you an update. Just a reminder of Census Geographies and how they kind of all play together. So that central line are the ones that are actually nested within each other. So the redistricting data was available all the way down to the block, which is the smallest level. But there's other kind of geographies that we're looking at, or that come into play specifically with the MPO, such as traffic analysis zones. Of course, like school districts is a whole other part of the redistricting process, but it doesn't have to be nested within other census geographies. Not all information is available at every geography. And then some of these boundaries can be reviewed and redrawn only in the decennial years, which is important for this year. Others can be redrawn every year. It just kind of depends on the office within the Census Bureau that is managing that. And there's a link here on our data portal. We have kind of a map that goes through these geographies so you can see how they are nested, how they're not, and maybe how they've changed over time. But looking at Tennessee nationally, we had kind of moderate growth over the last decade. So this is growth from 2010 decennial to 2020 decennial compared to the nation and compared to other states. The South and the West saw the most growth, and we were kind of in the middle of the pack with 9%. But something interesting is we went from the 16th most populous state in the country, or from the 17th to the 16th, surpassing Indiana. And the reason that's important is the way federal apportionment formulas work is it kind of ranks the states. So we jumped up one, which is really interesting. And one of those geographies that I was kind of talking about are metropolitan MSA areas. They're very economically and kind of commuter data tied. So it doesn't necessarily reflect our region. There was a proposal to change these this year, but it did not pass, so they're going to stay the same. And the reason I bring it up is that combined statistical areas was the only regional value available in the redistricting data, so it's kind of our best comparison for peer regions. So ours includes the red Nashville, Davidson, Murfreesboro, Franklin area, as well as Lawrenceburg, Lewisburg, and Shelbyville, so Bedford, Marshall, and Warren County. And then that's other regions that we looked at that are similar in size, similar growth rates. And so we actually saw kind of the highest growth rate out of all the peers we looked at, with the exception of Raleigh-Durham, which had 1% higher. And we also had the 5th most added people out of the 17 regions we looked at, so Middle Tennessee is pretty common. Also looking at our rate of growth nationally and not just among those peers, we ranked 7th for the highest growth rate. And what's interesting to me on this is that the 6 that ranked higher, we have a higher population than them, except for Orlando. So a lot of high growth and as well as a high raw number kind of coming to our region. And then I'm going to just dive into some kind of county level, block level within the region. So the region as well outpaced the state and outpaced the nation. And 10 of our counties actually outpaced that rate individually as well. Something to point out in this slide, and you'll see it in other slides, is because we're looking at 2010 to 2020, Trousdale County added a prison in 2016, and that group quarters population is included in the total. So that'll skew some things. You'll see Trousdale is like the highest population rate. I would encourage you to kind of just ignore that, or keep in mind that a lot of those people are incarcerated. So when we do a more in-depth analysis on group quarters, I'll be sure to separate that out. But for now, we just wanted to talk about the totals. So like I said, Trousdale showing a 48% increase, but if you ignore that, Williamson saw the highest growth among all of the counties. You can see how they're comparing to the nation and to the state, as well as Davidson, of course, added the most number of people, but Rutherford was not far behind. So we've got a lot of growth going on. Something we love to talk about are our population projections. You remember we went through them all in RTP, and 2020 was one of our horizon years. So the GNRC projection, which is based on Woods and Pool Economics national source, our base year was 2017. The state data center, which is in orange, their base year is 2018. So those base years really affect kind of the model output, of course. So the states was a little bit closer because they were just that much closer to 2020. But in almost every county, we both underestimated what the true count was. And so if you think all the way back to the RTP, when we were kind of thinking like, these population projections are kind of aggressive. No, they weren't. And also, it's not even that we're saying we're going to hit it in this year. It's just kind of, we're going to hit this number, and it's only a matter of when. So, we're kind of growing at a faster rate than we saw in the shortest horizon year. This may affect our models in the next RTP for our next long-range projection out to 2050, but just something to keep in mind. I thought that was really interesting. Now, we're going to look a little more spatially. So this is population density in 2010, now 2020. Let's look back again. So you can see a lot of densification in the already dense areas, but as well as some growth into some more sprawling areas. The light green areas expanded, which is interesting to see our growth patterns. This is specific gain by block, and gain in the highest areas. Kind of hard to see, but with the cities there, you can see there's some growth in the rural counties and pockets just outside of city limits in those unincorporated areas. And so that'll present unique demands for transportation. And then compared to housing unit gain, which was also available in the redistricting totals, it's obviously a lot denser for population. You can have more than one person in a housing unit, but I just thought it was interesting. It was pretty stark difference between population and housing. Might speak to some housing shortages, or there's a increased demand for more housing units, and that again, there's some like new development outside of city limits, as well as kind of infill or redevelopment of more units in the city. And it's hard to talk about gain and not talk about loss. So a lot of these losses are in kind of city centers where they're becoming not losing people, but less dense. So just interesting to see. And then something else available in the redistricting data is minority and ethnic racial data. So that's kind of all the redistricting offers. It offers voting age population, but we were going to wait until we get the full information to do an age kind of analysis. But looking at minorities, again, kind of ignoring Troutdale. A lot of growth in minority populations, and actually every county outpaced the nation and the state except for Davidson at the rate of diversification. So again, Davidson sees the most people added with the bigger county, but the rates are a lot higher than the other counties, especially Cheetah. Again, change in minority versus the total rate outpaced by far in every single county. So we're diversifying at a faster rate than we're growing. The nation is seeing this trend as well. And then looking at our projections, you'll see they're a little more off than the totals, and that's just, again, the way modeling works. If you're in a subpopulation of a total population, it's going to be a little less accurate. But again, the state and our projections were a little bit under the 2020 count in pretty much every county for what we expected to see. And so these are some pretty interesting maps spatially. Again, this is looking at change from 2010, so it's over the last decade if you've been in Nashville around that long. But see a lot of growth in minority density, especially in South Nashville, Clarksville, Murfreesboro. The greens are kind of like a gain, a new population in an area, or increased density in where they were already living. This is the white population specifically. So you see a really high growth in like East Nashville, downtown core, downtown Spring Hill, kind of moving further out. And those black areas, black blocks are where there was a new density in 2020, but it wasn't there in 2010. So seeing some sprawl as well, people kind of just moving into the fringes. This is a zoom in on kind of Davidson, Rutherford, Murfreesboro areas. So you see a lot of moving into the urban core or into the fringes. And in the next slide, we'll see how that's affecting other populations. So So this is specifically the Black or African American population. With the white people moving into the urban core, it's pushed out a lot of, especially historically Black neighborhoods, East Nashville, North Nashville in particular, with them relocating or displacing to a lot in Murfreesboro, as well as Laverne, Smyrna, South Nashville, East Nashville, parts of Green City. So this is no surprise in a way. I think this is something that we all knew, or anecdotally, but it's just really interesting to see the actual data behind it with the 2020 count behind it. With South Nashville being kind of the most diverse area in the region, it's just interesting to see the block relationship. And as well as Hispanic and Latino change, what was interesting in this one and sets it apart from the other two groups is there is not as much red, so not as much moving around or losing population as much as it was just increased density, increased diversification, more people moving in, kind of to the areas that they were already in and just growing. So what this all means, and I'm sure you all know with your redistricting right now, you're probably connecting with what it means, but it's really going to affect our urbanized areas. If you aren't aware, there was a significant change in the criteria for urbanized areas, and that can affect the MPO, different funding sources, and everything. We're not making any conclusions about that because the criteria was just such a different change. We can't really predict what it's going to look like. I don't think it'll affect our MPO too much, but there just might be some splitting or merging of our existing urbanized areas. But they did change the density and population thresholds. Funding sources, therefore, will be affected, especially with the new thresholds, as well as the formulas, apportionment. Like I said, we went from 17th to 16th federally, but within the region too, our populations are growing. And just our demographics, the diversification of the region, when the age stuff comes out, I'm sure that we'll see some trends there. And that's just going to be changing who is riding our transit, but also who's using our roadways, who's living here. Probably the best slide to take away, if you didn't have all the dates compiled for yourself. So we had the apportionment data, which was just the federal totals to the president. That's the first thing that has to come out. We got our redistricting data a couple months ago. This month we'll have experimental one-year estimates. They're calling them experimental because the ACS was not confident in their 2020 count, so it's not going to be the most reliable. But the 5-year estimate is a 5-year average, so it's a little more robust, and that will be coming out this December. So like I said, we want to do a series of kind of 2020 numbers updates. You'll probably see one from us in January or February talking about the ACS. And the ACS is where you get the educational attainment, homeownership, median income, a lot more of those detailed demographics anyway. And then next year, we'll have more total counts at a more specific level. Spring, summer, the urban areas come out. That's the big one. And then fall, we'll see how that kind of affects us specifically. USDOT will designate their TMAs for the year. And it's unclear whether or not the urban area designation will change federal legislation. I'll just say that. It's currently federal legislation is set up with like urban areas, and that's the language, and they're usually dictated by the census. With the way that they're changing the thresholds and the criteria, that could change the language, it could change the designation. We just don't know. But one resource I encourage you to look at, kind of talking about that, how it may play out. They did a little scenario exercise in East Tennessee. Their MPO is obviously different than ours because Johnson City, Kingsport, and Bristol all operated 3 separate MPOs, but in pretty close proximity to each other. So with the growth affecting them in their urban areas, they could become 1 MPO, there could be 2 MPOs, and like just 2 of them merge. They may become 1 TMA, but 3 MPOs, depending on how their councils agree to merge or not. And so they did a really good illustration of how the new criteria can affect just some of the things that we work with. Like I said, our region's a little different. I don't think we'll be merging with Clarksville, but it's just really interesting to see how that might play out in a smaller, closer proximity area. They do a good job of explaining what I talked about. If you have any questions, I love to talk about demographics in the census, and if not, feel hear from me in January.
All right. Thank you, Carson. From the committee, do we have any questions for her on this? Seeing none, again, this informational item, no action here. Next on, we'll move to the regular reports section of our agenda. We had it listed as Elizabeth Watkins, but I see Sean over there, Sean Santaya.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, Sean Santaya, XWA Tennessee Division. Not much to report. Everyone's probably heard of our funding situation, and Anna alluded to the uncertainty there. We were furloughed for a day right at the start of the fiscal year, got funded for 30 days. Now we're funded again to December 3rd. So feeling a little bit of pain, and I'm sure everyone also already knows this, but the difficult part of that situation is, you know, FHWA can only apportion funding proportionate to the amount that we've been funded. So we were only able to apportion 8.5% or so of fiscal year 22 funding for TDOT to be able to obligate on the project. So that's you know, that puts TDOT and other state DOTs in a tough spot when they're trying to obligate funding and advance projects. So we at FHWA, the staff level, don't tend to get any advance notice of legislation and things like that. So you guys probably hear about the next funding bill through the news just as soon as we will. But if we do hear anything, we'll be sure to share. So, that's the only item I've got. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Now, if anybody's ever gone through, if you got a project that you're waiting on obligation for construction funds especially, that's a critical item. So keep, if you're in that place, keep informed on what the news reports are on that. For TDOT report, let's turn it to Jonathan Russell.
Just so you're all aware, last year TDOT started what we call the Urban Transportation Plan Grant, which is a grant open to 80 cities and/or counties in the MPO region. Last year we had 8 applications from the MPO. We funded 1, which was in Sumner County, which is a bike ped active transportation plan. All the cities are involved in that, in the county. I know this past Monday night you'll have a public meeting on that. Again, just some update on that. The contract was in December 31st, but the consultant has asked for a 2-month extension. That's done, and we finalized in February. So the application process is open right now. You go to TDOT website, you type in TDOT Transportation Planning Grant, and all the information there. There's just no formal application this year. It's really just kind of a self-directed application. You know, write up a description, what the need is, including any map associated, and that is due to TDOT by December 30th. So again, open to anyone in this room, city, county, going independent, however you want to do it. Max funding on that is $200,000 with a 10% local match. Any questions about that? Is that valid? No. City, county, anyone can apply.
Jonathan, how much money do you have allocated for this program?
We have $2.4 million allocated statewide for that. Last year, of course, I said we did it. We have 11 NPOs in the state. We had 10 of those 11 put in application. Bristol was number 5, and we did fund 1 in every NPO. There's been discussion on whether we find multiple funds this year, and the answer to that is don't know. If you have any applications, we get what the total looks like. But $2.4 million for that this year. And last year, of the 8 applications we had in the NPO, I'd say 6 of them funded easily, because they were good applicants. I'll say 2 bad ones were, but 6 of the 8 were pretty good. Again, if you have questions, reach out to me on that. Application directly due to the email that they get more than our manager and our office there. Again, any questions, feel free to reach out. You have plenty of time to get that done. We're on a strict schedule as far as timelines on these, and that's all laid out on our website. So we feel like we can do that. So we look to get everything kicked off the first week of April. That's all I have, Andy.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? No?
Any word on the last round of CMAQ grant announcements?
No.
Okay. Just call it out.
Yeah.
Good question. Excellent question. Okay, any other questions? Okay, all right, thank you. Moving on to the chair's report, for myself, I know that Anna's gonna talk a little bit about the project delivery task force. I myself, as well as, other city staff, GNRC members, and, TDOT members have been a part of that, so I won't steal her thunder on it, but we've had 2 meetings, and it's been, very good discussion. And so, one thing I'd say in general, from a local level, I know that we all get blamed. It's very common to say, well, it's the city's fault. And one of the things that I think, especially Mayor Reed, is chairing the meeting, she said, basically leave your feelings at the door, all discussions. We're not pointing blame at one person. I know for us, a lot of times we'll say TDOT, we'll point the blame at TDOT. But there's things for all of us to keep in mind. Project readiness on our end is key. It's one of the things. So I did just want to note those items. Also, on the annual luncheon, I know we had that since we last met. I do just want to give a thank you to GNRC staff putting that together. I know that's a lot of hard work, and so appreciate your hard work and effort on that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anna.
Thanks, Andy. Just real quick before I launch into this last update on the project delivery task force, I'll apologize to those of you joining us virtually. I know it probably sounds like I'm yelling at you, but if you saw the size of the room that we're in, you would get it. And I'm not mic'd, so apologies for the projection. But yeah, like Andy said, just a quick update on our recently minted project delivery task force, which is a group of our member jurisdictions, implementing agencies, and relevant TDOT divisions, and is chaired by Mayor Mary Esther Reed from the town of Smyrna. The task force, of course, was created to focus on the issue of timely obligation and expenditure of federal funds and to track the progress of our transportation improvements that are being made through our regional TIP. Flip to the next slide for me, Daniel. So this group that you're seeing here on this slide met most recently in the middle of last month to continue their deep dive into the details and mechanisms of funding allocation and obligation, and are working on the creation of a survey that we plan to share with all of you in the hopes of documenting the challenges your own agencies have experienced with developing and delivering transportation projects in our state and in our region. And they're also working on fine-tuning a tool that can be used to track project progress as it's programmed in our TIP and can assist in locating projects that are struggling or projects that have fallen behind schedule. One more for me, Daniel. These efforts are to work towards fulfilling some of the goals and objectives that were outlined for this task force upon its creation, and we look forward to sharing additional developments with this group soon, and especially as this work is going to be complementary, of course, to our efforts to update the TIP, as we discussed earlier in this meeting. And that's it for me.
All right. Any other questions for Anna or staff?
As someone who's participated in the last few meetings of this, I just want to say it's great, a lot of good conversations with elected officials and agency staff. There is a presentation that was given at the last meeting, kind of like I don't want to say an NPO 101, but essentially it was. Could I request maybe at some point that presentation be given to this board? I think a lot of new members, it might be very appropriate and timely to help people understand what it is we're actually trying to do.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment and suggestion, and something we've been talking about too, as we work toward the TIP update. We do know we have a lot of new faces, both new members and new faces in the room, so we definitely want to do some educational efforts as we launch into this TIP update effort, make sure everybody's up to speed on exactly how everything functions, how the TIP and the plan fit together, how all of the funding works. Yes, very good suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Anna, for that. Before we adjourn, I'd like to ask if there's any other business that anyone would like to bring before the body. Seeing none, I'd like to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved, and go Braves.
Kelly, you live in Greenville in Spring Hill?
Save it for the end.